alaikum. We are going to have a session today about managing stress and anxiety in graduate school. And the lecturer will be Dr. Mahdi Kaskas. He's a Canadian certified counselor and a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Social Work, University of Calgary, Canada. He has done his bachelor degree in psychology from the University of Alberta, Canada. And he also did his Bachelor of Professional Arts in Criminal Justice from Athabasca University. And he has a master's degree in counseling psychology from Athabasca University. He has over 14 years of experience working intensely with Muslim youth and families of all ages. Additionally, he is a president and founder of Aoun for Muslim Youth and Family Services Institute. النهارده ان شاء الله هيبقى عندنا محاضره عن كيفيه اداره القلق والضغوط في خلال مرحله الدراسات العليا. المحاضر دكتور مهدي قفقف، هو مستشار نفسي كندي معتمد وطالب دكتوراه في كليه العلوم الاجتماعيه بجامعه كاليرجي بكندا، وهو حاصل على درجه البكالوريوس في علم النفس من جامعه البرتا وبكالوريوس العداله الجنائيه من جامعه اثاباسكا، بالإضافة إلى أنه يحمل درجة الماجستير في الاستشارات النفسية من جامعة أثاباسكا، ولديه أكثر من 14 سنة خبرة في العمل الاجتماعي بشكل مكثف في الاستشارات النفسية بشكل مكثف مع الشباب والعائلات المسلمة في جميع المراحل والأعمار، وهو يرأس منظمة مهدي، منظمة عون لخدمات الأسر والشباب المسلم بولاية ألبرتا في كندا. أهلا وسهلا بحضرتك دكتور مهدي.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. How are you? I hope everybody's had a good evening if you're in Egypt, a good morning if you're in Canada, and just a good overall whatever, wherever you are, inshallah ta'ala. This presentation is in English, so before we begin, I'd like to first apologize for those of you that English may not be your first language. It is my first language, so I had to decide, do I present in a language that I'm good at speaking in or in a language that you're good at understanding? So I hope you're okay. I chose the former. I chose the language that I can speak in so that you don't have to keep laughing at my broken Arabic. So let us begin, inshallah. Managing stress and anxiety in graduate school. I'd first and foremost like to thank the Egypt scholars for putting this together. I think this is a very, very important presentation because at the end of the day, if stress and anxiety block your abilities, then you can never really show who you are. You can never really show your skill. Most of you probably have the same background, especially if you're entering graduate school. You were probably the first of your class in junior high and high school, and in university you were probably got very good grades, even in your master's. But when it comes to a PhD level of education, it's fundamentally different than everything else. In a PhD, the expectations are different. So that's where we usually start when it comes to anxiety and stress, is the expectations. What I'm hoping to do today is covering these areas: stress and anxiety, procrastination, perfectionism, pessimism, self-confidence, relaxation, and some of the other stuff that you should know in terms of getting support. Now, these slides are available to you, so if there's certain words that you don't understand, please, by all means, Google Translate can do the job for you. And also, inshallah ta'ala, if possible, this lecture could be translated in Arabic at a later date. But for now, I'm just going to assume that you're in front of me here. You're a group of students who, again, somebody may have told you that you're the best of the best, that you will be contributing knowledge to this world that nobody else has ever done, that you need to create new knowledge, and they've given you all of these high expectations. Naturally, what will happen is you start feeling like maybe you don't even you shouldn't be here. Maybe you feel like it's too much to expect from you. You start to feel like an imposter. And so the idea is these are very normal feelings. What you need to do is make sure that your expectations are very clear about what it is you're doing moving forward. Now, the other thing is you don't need a different skill set to manage anxiety and stress because you've already managed it. You certainly need different skills when it comes to completing the work as a PhD graduate, but that's not what this lecture is about. I'm almost certain that most of you are very, very intelligent and you know exactly what it is you need to do to complete your graduate studies. There's just this small aching feeling inside of you. And it's that feeling that I'm hoping, inshallah, by the end of today's presentation, you have a better understanding of, you have a better grasp and ability to deal with it. That is ultimately what we're going to be doing over the next 2 hours, inshallah. So give me everybody just write an X if everything's going good, or a 1 if things are going good, and a 0 if things are not going that well. In the what's it called? 1, good, okay. All right. All right. Good. Thank you. Good. All right. So, stress and anxiety. Everybody knows or everybody has experienced stress and anxiety because they're very normal feelings. Very normal. The idea here is we want to deal with the antecedents or the thing that comes before stress and before anxiety. If we're able to prevent it from happening, then we're able to ultimately live a happier life. Can we just mute whoever's just coughing right now? Whoever just coughed, just mute your mic, please. Thank you very much. Right. So, being immune from stress and anxiety. The idea here is nobody is immune from it. Nobody can prevent the stress and anxiety that comes, especially when it comes to graduate school, and especially when the expectations are so high. So, a lot of people have put, comics when it comes to their frustration with their thesis. This is usually after you've completed candidacy, after you're in the thick of it, as they say. This is where, you're coming closer to the deadline. So the idea here is, as this comic kind of represents, whenever you don't feel like expectations are being met, you start questioning your self-worth. You start questioning your own significance. That's where you seriously need others to remind you, to validate you, and remind you that that what you're doing is a great thing. And you're going to need an immense amount of motivation to get through all this. But again, anxiety and stress do a very serious damage to what's it called? To your level of motivation in the long term. Again, when it comes to self-concept, how good you really are compared to how good you think you are is usually never the same. So you're usually better than you think you are. What? That's that? All right. Sorry about that. So again, how good you think you are compared to how good you really are usually not the same. We as human beings we tend to underestimate our abilities rather than overestimate. And some people tend to overestimate their abilities. But the idea here is when it comes to stress and anxiety, we're usually saying we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't do it. Now, so far, I believe what I'm talking about is nothing new. You've heard this all before. You've heard about all of these stressful situations. You've got people have different life events, issues. Basically, if you can't pay for school, that's stress. if you can't, I mean, if you're struggling to find a job, that's stress. If you've got a family crisis, that's stress. Whenever you don't have the resources to deal with the problems, that results in stress. Whenever there's a sense of uncertainty, that results in anxiety. So I'm just going to write that down here. Uncertainty, I should probably say, leads to anxiety. How do I send this? I can't send.
Yeah, me too.
All right. I'm not sure why I can't send, but what I would have wrote here is uncertainty leads to anxiety, and lack of resources to deal with a problem leads to stress. Again, please. So uncertainty leads to anxiety, and a lack of resources, or the lack of, whether it's skills, finances, whatever it is, to address a situation, to get something done, or to solve a problem, that causes stress. So I want to just separate the two before we move forward. The other thing about graduate studies is that unlike your master's or your undergrad or elementary or junior high or high school, or even unlike a job, your supervisor is not really in charge of the process. You should be. You should be using your own supervisor to the best of your abilities. Ultimately, you have to remember, your supervisor will become your colleague one day. Whereas if you're in elementary or junior high or senior high or even undergrad, chances are your teachers and your educators, they've already given you an outline. They've told you exactly what they're expecting. And there's a rubric or a type of format that evaluates your progress, that tells you what you're doing is right. When it comes to graduate studies, it's your own standards that you're being held to. And certainly at the end of the day, your supervisor has a lot of resources and support for you. But unless you ask for them or unless you make it clear to them, chances are they can't read your mind, right? Unless in Egypt or in Italy there are faculties that can read minds. I'm not aware of them, but if there is, then we'd love to hear about it. But so never just assume that your supervisor knows what's going on. Now, again, I want you to think of a moment in your life when you were overly stressed. You probably are thinking about how you felt, some of the thoughts that were going on in your mind, and the life circumstance, what was happening at the time. We remember our stress very well because, well, plain and simple, it's terrible. We don't like to be stressed out. I mean, some people have been living the majority of their lives stressed out or anxious, always worried about something, or always lacking something. And so the idea here is, even though we can never get rid of it totally, we need to remember, everybody here needs to remember that you've dealt with it before, you can deal with it again. You have the strategies to deal with it because you've done it before. Now, we know that if we don't deal with it, forget about what it does to our bodies and its health, because I'm sure there are tons of other presentations that will talk about the physiology of stress and how it affects the body and all that stuff. I specifically want to focus on how it affects your sense of happiness and how it increases your sense of misery. Those are the only two things that I really want to focus on. Because if you can leave this session a little happier and less misery, inshallah, I've done my job. If you can also leave with skills that can increase your happiness later and reduce your misery later, then I've also done my job, inshallah. But certainly, stress is a major factor in many health-related diseases all over the world. But there's three specific factors related to stress that I'd like to focus on. And they're circled here in the top right in the presentation, this sense of perfectionism and procrastination. No, we're not going to talk about smoking because I'm sure many of you have got your argila lit up or your cigarettes lit up. So I'm hoping to only focus on perfectionism, procrastination, and this sense of pessimism as it relates to people's self-esteem. Now, I just want to do one more check-in. Give me a 1 if the pace is okay. Give me a 0 if the pace is going too fast. We have a very, okay, too fast? Sure. All right. Well, we haven't really gotten into the good stuff, so even if we're rushing the introduction here, it's okay. It starts to slow down a little after. So, procrastination. In order to end procrastination, let me rephrase that. If you want to eliminate anxiety and stress in graduate studies, stop procrastinating. That is the conclusion of this presentation. Just in case we ran out of time, I'm giving you my conclusion first. If you want to end or at least manage anxiety and stress in graduate studies, then you have to put a real end to procrastination. PREP. Put a real end to procrastination. And how do we do that? Basically, we prep. We got to prepare for it. That's the acronym. Can I get access to this? Yeah, I'm trying to get access to, no, to the, yeah, I'll you know what, so P R E P. I just ruined the slide, but putting a real end to procrastination. That's the ultimate objective of this presentation, inshallah ta'ala, also, is to be able to, get things done on time. But let's just take a moment here and go through the stages of procrastination, the cycle, right? Since we have a smaller group, I want to kind of hear your thoughts. What do you think the first stage, so take a look at these stages on your screen. What do you think the first stage of procrastination is? Would you say it's, I'll start early this time? If so, put a 1. I have to start soon. If so, put a 2. I still have time. That's a 3, okay. I have to start soon. 2, good, okay, fair enough. So, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're all wrong. The first stage of procrastination is, I'll never procrastinate again. Every now and then, we put things off to a later date. That's totally fine. We delay food, we delay relationships, we delay getting some important things done. That's not necessarily procrastination. Procrastination is when you put something off continuously, knowing that it's going to hurt you. Knowing that if you were just to get started, things would be better. So it's that block. It just stops you from doing something. So the first stage of procrastination is usually, I'll never procrastinate again. Give me a 1 if anybody here in this room has said they'll never procrastinate again, but they ended up procrastinating again. Throw a 1 up on the screen if that's true of you. Several times, okay. Good. All right, so we have some very diligent and committed people in the room, but we also have some people who have procrastinated before. So, and I'll never procrastinate again, or you could have said, I'll never do that again. And then stage 2 starts, and that is, I'll start early this time. So you might even actually start early, and you start preparing your documents, or you do something that you know that you need to do, and you've got an amazing outline, and it's only 2 days into the semester. then so what some people start doing is they start saying, well, you know what, I haven't started yet, but I have to start soon. And then you perhaps get into this mindset where, well, what if I don't start now? What's the big deal? I mean, nobody else has started. It's only 1 week into school or 2 weeks. I can always focus later. And then you reach a point, and this is the danger zone, where you say to yourself, I should have started sooner. That's a point where most people that I work with enter, and they said, I should have started sooner. And they sometimes, the ones that are at least, I'm not going to say smart, I'll say wise, they approach somebody for help at that point when they know they should have started sooner. So this might mean that you have to go back to the beginning, restart everything from scratch, but you still have time. Otherwise, what starts to happen is that people get into this stage where they start doing everything but what they're actually supposed to do. So instead of reading the article, they're cleaning their room. Instead of actually doing some of the work, they're playing video games or going out or doing something, everything but what they're actually supposed to do. I mean, think about it. Have you ever started cleaning your entire desk and arranging it, knowing full well that you need to just read? And so sometimes these are the things that people start identifying as their source of procrastination. That the moment that they start doing everything but what they're supposed to do, that's when they say, I'm procrastinating. But the stage has started before. Here is where stress starts to kick in. When they start saying, I can't enjoy anything. It's the only thing on your mind. The paper, the exam, the submission, whatever it is, it's the only thing on your mind and you can't enjoy anything else. But there is a glimmer of hope because there's still time. That's the next phase. So you recognize that even though you're not enjoying anything, you're not doing the work, you know there's still time. So for all of us here, with exception to, is Abu Bakr here yet? No, not yet. Okay, when he gets here, his candidacy exam's tomorrow, so for him there is no time. For him it's going to be just basically managing the moment-to-moment panic, right? That's, but we'll get to that later. But for the rest of us, there is still time to get that job done. Even if it's 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, whatever it is, we get to that point where there's still time. When you can't get yourself to start working despite little time left, this is when we start to self-diagnose, which basically means we all become psychologists or psychiatrists, and we say there must be something wrong with me. I have ADHD, I have ADD, I can't focus, I must have something, and then you might even visit the doctor just to confirm your diagnosis. So this is also a very anxiety high stage when people start to feel like the problem is outside of their control. So the simple answer is you're absolutely right. There is something wrong with you. But it's not a mental disorder. It's basically, well, you're a procrastinator. You then get into that close to the last phase, which is that final choice, to do or not to do. Do I continue or do I not do it? And most of us go through this where we have that phase where we start questioning, should I get it done or should I not get it done? But we usually, because we're such professional procrastinators, we usually know that even though we think we can't do it and we just want to give up, the anxiety is so high that we say, you know what, I can't wait any longer, I'm just going to get it done. And then what ends up happening? You actually get it done. Sort of like this young man here, 5 p.m., I haven't done anything today. You know, why? I wasted the whole day on things that don't matter. I got to do anything. They read a paragraph, they do something, and then they feel that that was enough. Maybe that is exactly what is enough, reading one paragraph. But, oops, we went too far. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. And then after that, after you get it done, you submit it, you say what? I'll never procrastinate again. And then the cycle continues again, and you'll say, well, I'll start early this time. Give me on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning you agree these are cycles that you've gone through, 1 meaning this stuff is all, doesn't make any sense at all. There we go.
Okay, allow me, Dr. Mahdi, just to make a small announcement for all participants. Please, when you reply to Dr. Mahdi, reply in the chat box such that all other attendees can see your replies. Because when you reply in the Q&A box, only panelist Dr. Mahdi and the administrator of the session can see it. Thank you so much. هستأذنكم بس تردوا على دكتور مهدي لما يسأل سؤال في الشات بوكس، فلما بتردوا في الQ&A section بقية الحضور مش بيقدر يشوفها. شكرا جزيلا. You can continue, Dr. Mahdi.
Thank you very much. And feel free at any time to write a question. I may or may not answer it right away, but it'll be something that'll be on my agenda to make sure I cover. So if you want to write that question, write the question in the My Q&A. And if you want to respond to the comments so everybody else can see in the all. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on. So if procrastination is the major problem when it comes to both stress and anxiety, because again, anxiety is that sense of worry, that concern that you have that's connected to uncertainty. Sometimes when we don't know whether we're going to get something done or not, we get anxious. Whereas stress is when you don't have the resources to achieve something. And here, time is the ultimate resource. Fair enough? So time is a resource. Procrastination is the killer of time. We know that. And then anxiety and the uncertainty that results from the procrastination, they too are also very connected. So that's why it's very important to focus on procrastination and what it is and why we do it. Some of you, sorry, some of you already know your own levels of procrastination. So there's no need to go into too much of an analysis of it. But often what we do is we wait to the last minute, or we don't take risks, which basically means here that you want to stick to a system that you're very, very used to. And the problem with that is that that system may need to change for your PhD graduate studies. If you're always used to last minute, you know, at the end of the day, you read for an hour and you get a 95% on your exam, some of you are very, very intelligent. You know the material. But when it comes to PhD work, that system will no longer work. So my recommendation to especially those of you that have just started or those of you that are, you know, close to the end, just started or close to getting started, is start to take some risks. Start to do something differently and evaluate whether or not that works. Because you're going to be expected to do a lot of things differently when you start your PhD process. I think it's probably, we're good for time. I'd like to actually hear from everybody. If you can type, if you're not comfortable typing where everybody sees it, type it in the My Q&A. I'd like to know what phase are you in your graduate studies? So have you just started? Have you completed candidacy? Are you already collecting data? Are you analyzing data? Are you getting ready for your dissertation presentation? So if you don't mind, the people here, if you don't mind just typing in what phase you're in so that I can tailor the rest of the presentation to the proper phase. I thought there would be, if there's 300 people, we couldn't do this, but if there's only 40 people, that's not a problem. Congratulations, whoever finished their PhD. Yeah. Excellent, finished the PhD. So those of you that have finished the PhD, chances are you're now listening to this thinking, well, I don't know what you're thinking. Well, I don't want to assume, but usually that you will be helping some other poor PhD student get through this phase. Master's degree collecting data. Excellent, excellent. Okay. All right, well, that's good for me to know. Otherwise, I was assuming everybody is in their candidacy phase or wherever they're at. So one aspect, because you're in still in the thick of it, in the, really getting it done, is the confrontations. It's much better to have any confrontations that need to happen, have it early on and not later on. If that means a conversation with your family about you might have said this will take me 2 years, but now you find out it's going to take you 4. Or you might say, I only need 2 hours a day, but you realize, you know what, I need 4. Or your supervisor. Maybe you don't see eye to eye on something. Now's the best time to approach it. And I think there are many different strategies and tools online on how to best approach people when it comes to conflict. That's beyond our scope today. But the idea is don't avoid the necessary confrontations because that type of procrastination is one that will weigh on your mind continuously. If you know you have to talk to your supervisor about something, but you keep delaying it, the only thing that's going to happen is the solution is the problem's not going to be solved simply because, well, your supervisor doesn't even know that it exists, and you're going to constantly think about it and rethink it, and you're going to play out the confrontation in your mind, and usually what will happen is you'll catastrophize. You'll make it such a big deal that you'll decide not even to do it anymore. So that's the idea with the social aspect of the graduate studies. You really have to make sure that you deal with the social and relationship issues early on. But these 5, if you have one of these, then you have a serious problem when it comes to procrastination, and you have exactly 1 hour to get rid of it. Otherwise, it's going to literally increase your anxiety and stress. Now, before I move forward here, I want you to know that all 5 of these are irrational, okay? All 5 of these are irrational, which basically means with a little bit of deep thinking, you yourself can overcome them. The first one, well, are you unable or unwilling to consider alternative ways of thinking? So are you stuck in the way that it's been forever? I have a small study that they did a long time ago where they brought in a group of monkeys. Okay, now again, this is just a little bit of a light-hearted piece to the presentation because we've gone for 30 minutes and I think we need a psychological break. So imagine this. There's these 10 monkeys in a room. And what they do is they place a bunch of bananas in the ceiling. And there's a bunch of boxes all over this room. So at first what happens, the monkeys jump in. They see the bananas. They try to jump at it. They can't do it. Eventually they start to adapt to the situation. They grab a box, 2 boxes, jump on the box, jump, grab the banana, and they're successful. They've achieved their goal. But then they added another variable or a factor to the study. What they did is they removed one of the old monkeys and put a new one in. Except this time, whenever a monkey would jump for the banana and actually achieve the goal, they would spray all of the monkeys with very cold water. And so the monkeys would get terrified. They continued to do this. They'd remove one monkey, one of the old monkeys, put a new one. The new monkey would jump into the room, and again, with all of this uncontained ambition, they would jump for the banana, and everyone would get sprayed. Eventually, another learning process was happening. The monkeys that had gotten sprayed, that were that suffered, started learning that if you even try to achieve the goal, if you try to jump for the banana, it'll lead to punishment. So what they started doing is when a monkey would come in, after you've got all these monkeys who have been sprayed down, a new monkey would come in. Before the monkey would even try to achieve the goal, they would jump on him, beat him up, and the monkey would never try it again. And this would happen to every new monkey that would come in. Eventually, what happened is that you would have all of these monkeys sitting in this room with a bunch of bananas on the roof, and not a single one of them knows why they're not reaching for the goal. Not a single one of them is even willing to take the risk because out of the fear of the punishment that has been passed down from the previous experiences. And often, sometimes we all act like monkeys, where we don't, we want the goal. We're very ambitious about the goal. We don't strategize, we just jump for it. But eventually we start learning our skills, we start developing these skills, but we have to always remember that there are going to be times where we don't want to change. There are going to be times where we're going to remember that, well, this has always worked for me, it'll always work in the future. With graduate studies, that's not necessarily going to work this time around. You might need a new skill set if you're going to successfully achieve this with a limited amount of stress and anxiety. So the first one is alternative ways of thinking, starting with the idea that if you don't believe that procrastination is causing you problems, that's another obstacle. If you don't believe something is a problem, then why would you even try to change it? So that's another thing that everybody needs to kind of ask themselves is, is procrastination a problem in my life? If not, if your source of anxiety and stress comes from something else, then that's for a different presentation. But for this presentation, that anxiety and that stress is really about eliminating your procrastination. That's putting things off to a later time. The third one, which I think is very important, is if you don't believe that you can change. I mean, you've changed before, you can change again. So that's another irrational thought that will be an obstacle to overcoming procrastination. The other thing is if you feel that there's too many things going on in your life to actually focus on procrastination. And so what you're doing is you're procrastinating dealing with procrastination. So the cycle continues. And then finally, if you're too anxious to practice new behaviors. So you've got to try something new. Now, what I'm asking you to do is not go out and become somebody different. No, be you, do you. But what I'm asking you, hopefully, if you're willing, is to try something that you haven't been doing. So think about one thing that you know you should have been doing, but you haven't. And see if you can kind of muster up the motivation to just start there. Now, again, if you look at this screen, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but I'll go through a couple of them. These are some of the reasons why we procrastinate, why we put something off to the last minute. And I'd like to also hear from you on the board. Which one do you feel is the most important one to talk about right now? Is it the task is difficult? It's too time-consuming? I don't even know how to do it. I'm afraid of screwing up just basically means making a mistake. I must do it perfectly or it's not worth doing at all. And then the last one, I'm so easily overwhelmed, I recognize it's really not that bad. So the last one there is, it's just something happens to you. It's not that bad, but something happens to you. Time consuming. So we'll start with the first two then. Now, is it that difficult? The question becomes, can you absolutely not achieve this goal? Or can you reassure yourself that it's not really that hard? and if you broke it down into smaller steps, can it get done? So here, performance is a function. I'm just going to write this down here. I can do text, right? Performance equals ability plus resources plus, okay, let's try that again. Performance equals ability plus motivation plus resources. Okay, so here the idea is if you don't have the ability, it's not showing.
Yeah, you just write it in the chat box. Yeah.
Can somebody write in the chat box?
I would hear.
This is not-
I do.
Okay, write it down, please. Performance equals ability plus motivation plus the resources. So if you have all the resources and you know you can actually do it, then it all comes down to that motivation to actually just get it done. So whenever we say the task is too difficult, what we're saying is that we don't have the ability to do it. But if we break it down into smaller steps and get some extra help, and we know we can do it, that's one thing. But again, the procrastination phase is not even thinking about the smaller steps. So that would be your first task, is think about the smaller steps and recognize that it's not really that hard. It just takes a lot of effort. Now, it also takes a lot of time, and that's the other, one of the more serious reasons that we procrastinate, is because, again, in our minds, we believe that it's going to take so much time, it's not worth doing it. But for a lot of things, they will take time. Graduate studies does take time. But again, the solution is breaking it down into smaller steps. The best advice I've received is basically read every day. Read an article and write every day. Even if you're writing for the garbage, even if you're writing just to throw it away, write every single day. And that's when you start breaking it down, and that's, I remind myself by basically saying, read one, write one. Read one a day, write one a day, whether it's a page, a paragraph, whatever it is. But if you're consistent about it, then what ends up happening is you don't need to develop a masterpiece every 2 months. If you write consistently and if you work consistently, then that's what people will expect from you. That's what you'll expect from yourself. But if you procrastinate and you delay and you you keep telling your supervisor or whoever, tomorrow, or next week, you won't want to submit just anything regular. You'll want to put forth an entire masterpiece, because at the end of the day, you'll be thinking that they're thinking, I waited all this time just for that. So what you want to do is you want to try to be consistent. If you're able to be consistent, then a lot of what we're talking about here will not be a problem in the months to come. But it's got to be consistent. I'll leave you with this slide. Feel free to look at it at your own pace, at your own time, if there's anything else that you feel will help from there. Now we kind of get into more the psychological side of things, and that is some of the concepts and the sources of procrastination. So why do we procrastinate? If you look at these two categories, there are negative characteristics and then there are positive ones. Okay? Now, do you agree that negative perfectionism, and I'll explain shortly the difference between negative and positive perfectionism. But do you agree? Give me a 1 for yes, a 0 for no. Do you agree that negative perfectionism, negative self-confidence or lack thereof, disorganization, being distracted, and anxiety are negative things? And that motivation, organization, focus, being relaxed, which is basically the opposite of the others, and having ihsan in the process of what we do are positive things. So let us start off with this notion of perfectionism. So one of the reasons why we procrastinate is because we're perfectionists. Now, what I'm hoping to conclude, again, this session with is that stop aiming for perfectionism and start aiming for progression. So become a progressionist. Basically, step by step, you're moving closer towards your goal. There's different types of perfectionism, and I want to only focus on these three. The first one is the perfectionism that comes from you. The second one is the perfectionism that comes from somebody else. And the last one is perfectionism that comes from society. So the perfectionism that comes from you, what you hold yourself to, that, again, is probably one of the most difficult ones to deal with because, well, it's you against you. And, sometimes, well, you wins. I'm hoping nobody here has more than one personality, but, the idea is we do that to ourselves sometimes. We have the weak personality and the strong personality, the positive perfectionist and the negative perfectionist. Others, when perfectionism comes from others, that is basically mom, dad, friends, family, teachers saying, you have to do this. You have to get a 99%. And I deal with a lot of parents who have struggles with their children because they don't understand why their children don't want to talk to them. And after asking a few questions, you find out that because for the kid's entire life, they would get a 95% and mom or dad would ask, where's the other 5%? They were never satisfied with great. They wanted perfect. And so what ends up happening is these children start to develop this notion that they have to be perfect or they're not going to be loved. And so this is a big deal. What time is it in Egypt right now? And in Italy? Do you guys need a break? Anybody need a break here for maybe 10 minutes?
In Egypt, it's 6:50
Is that Maghrib?
PM. Yes, Maghrib.
Okay. I always like, whether I'm presenting to Muslims or non-Muslims or anybody, I always like to respect people's religious and cultural practices. So it's a policy of mine. I think it's important. We'll take a break. Let's say 10 minutes. We'll come back at 11. For those of you that don't go for break and want to ask questions, by all means, you can ask questions, and we can chat while people are back from their break, inshallah.
At 7 p.m. Egyptian.
Oh, right. Sorry. So that's 7 p.m. Egyptian time, not 11 a.m. Egyptian time. It won't be here.
Okay.
Fair enough. Is that okay with the administrators here today?
Yeah, this is perfect.
Okay. All right. So when we get back, we'll get into what is perfectionism, and we'll go through some of the slides on negative and positive perfectionism, eventually leading us to identifying sources on why we ourselves would procrastinate. If we can solve that problem, we can be less anxious and less stressed as we complete our graduate studies. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
If you want to ask questions, and you can write it in Arabic or English, you can answer it in this way.
Question here. How can we break down our time into small steps in order to solve procrastination? So here, we're not talking about completing the task of the PhD or the master's. It's basically, how can we now start dealing with procrastination one step at a time or into smaller steps? What I usually, what's worked in the past for the workshops that I've presented is, and it will come, Mr. Reza Salim, it'll come in more detail later on in the presentation. But basically, I would ask people to just get started. Just go. So we would be in a workshop. I would have asked them to already be organized to bring the stuff that they need to complete. So if you're organized, you have all the resources in front of you. Sometimes what we need is we need an external voice or somebody outside of, to just give us a little bit of pressure. If we can do that consistently, eventually, if you're able to just break through that that moment where you don't want to do it, if you can do that once a day, starting off, if your procrastination is terrible, if you can start doing that once a day, it's like, you know, if you pray, for example, you wake up for Salatul Fajr, you just get up. You know, you force yourself to get up. But the ultimate killer is the snooze button. You know, when you just want to sleep for 5 more minutes. And that's what we do throughout the day. We just delay it for 5 more minutes. So that's one thing. Another thing is sometimes we need 5 minutes of intense courage to just overcome our own sense of procrastination. But practically, I think if you can just start, like I would say, for example, if there's something you need to work on now, just start it. And as simple as that sounds, it's a technique that that has worked with a lot of people in the past, but often, unfortunately, sometimes you need somebody else to actually tell you, listen, just get started. I'll check in with you in 10 minutes to make sure you started. It's basically what our parents did with us when they wanted us to get something done, and then they left the room and they said, I'll come back in 10 minutes to make sure you got it done. If they did that with us, then most likely we respond well to that technique. But if they stood over our heads, yelling and screaming, telling us, yalla, get it done, get it done, get it done, then we've developed a different style of motivation, which again is beyond the scope of this presentation, but that's just one quick answer. And I hope, Mr. Rida, we answer that question in more detail throughout the presentation. All right, it's on the other one. Ilham, are you there?
Okay, Mahdi? Yes?
Yes. So I've uploaded the presentation, the other one.
Yep, I can see.
So we'll get to that after. Can our audience see it? So,
Doctor.
so what are you seeing right now, just to confirm? Okay, so before the break, we started on this concept of al-mithaliya, perfectionism, right? Now, I like to remind myself that we will never know everything about everything. And there are 1,000 ways to do something and 100 ways will work. So we have to be comfortable with progress rather than perfection. There's a saying, al-kamalu lillah. I mean, it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect, absolute perfection. So here, the idea is we need to move beyond that feeling that we have to be perfect and find out what we're content with. So think about your own perfectionism. If you have these perfectionist tendencies, what does it look like? Because there are different forms of it. There's positive perfectionism and negative perfectionism. So let's start off with your level of satisfaction when you actually complete the work. So this part of our presentation is more of a thought-provoking exercise than it is to memorize it. So I'm going to switch slides here. And anytime I present, I remember they call it Bloom's Taxonomy of Learning, that learning comes in different ways. The lowest level of learning is just memorizing. So don't worry about memorizing this stuff, but actually try to focus on the next levels, which is understanding and applying it. Later on, after this presentation is done, you can analyze whether it works for you or not. But what I'm going to ask you to do is for the next 30 minutes, suspend your judgment for a bit. No harm will come to you, of course. Just suspend your judgment and try to engage in this exercise. Those that have done it before, it's been very helpful for them, and I'm hoping it'll be helpful for you as well. All right? So you're going to assess yourself on whether or not you're a positive perfectionist or a negative perfectionist. A positive perfectionist, when work is complete, they have this sense of deep satisfaction. A negative perfectionist is unable to feel satisfied even when they complete the project. Now, this is a very old reference, but the idea is I'm trying to keep things as basic as possible. When it comes to perception of reality, so think about how you view the world. For a positive perfectionist, there's a very realistic attitude, and it comes with a lot of common sense. But for others, it can be very unhealthy, and they start to withdraw from reality. So basically, it doesn't, when you're looking at the world from your perfectionist glasses, if you see the world in common sense, it makes sense, then you have a healthy form of perfectionism. But if it's extremely irrational, the way you see the world becomes very irrational. Like some of those things that, oh, I can never change, the world's always against me, no matter how good I do, I will always be terrible. All that, this is a negative worldview. These are other things that you would need to keep in check and focus on later, inshallah. Procrastinate it. Again, flexibility. For a positive perfectionist, you set high expectations, but you can adjust them. They're flexible. For a negative perfectionist, those standards that you set can never change. They can never be compromised regardless of what happens. So you have a crisis in the family, yet you still believe that you still should function at the exact same level before the crisis. So here, you have to be flexible, even if you are a perfectionist. I'm not saying that being a perfectionist is bad. What I'm saying is a negative perfectionism will lead to increased amount of procrastination, which will lead to more stress, which will lead to more anxiety, which will lead to lesser happiness and more misery. What you're motivated by is also important. A positive perfectionist is motivated by their desire to improve. So you're curious and you're excited and you want to improve. Yes, even though you want to still get things very, almost near perfect, but still you're motivated by improvement. Likewise, a negative perfectionist wants to get things done near perfect, but they're motivated by a fear of failure. They don't want to fail. They don't want others looking at them as failures. Unfortunately, that attitude, that fear of failure, often leads to an avoidance behavior. And it has a lot to do with the anxiety that we face. And then you become extremely defensive. You never want anybody to point out your mistakes, or a good word for you to take away with you is your blind spots. Every one of us has blind spots. Certain things about ourselves that we do not see, that others see within us. And if we're defensive every single time somebody criticizes us, then we're never going to improve. And it might be a sign of negative perfectionism. Because after all, think about it. If you look at your life, you might be the center of your world. I mean, how many people look up to you? They expect so much from you. They see you as the model of success, the best of the best. When you're at a party or you're at a gathering, or if you go back home, I know one of our guests here is visiting Egypt right now. I'm sure you're the king of the castle. So the idea here is what people do not see is the anxiety that's concealed. It's hidden. People don't see that in you. It's like the newlyweds. Nobody sees the frustration that they have with each other. And that's why lately pre-marriage counseling has become one of the most important things, at least here in Canada, because a lot of the anxiety and the stress that comes with getting married can be alleviated and minimized with 4 sessions of counseling. So the idea here is nobody sees what's under the surface. Only you do. And that's why it's important to recognize, are you a positive or a negative perfectionist? Now, when it comes to the way you see yourself, usually positive perfectionists are in search of that ideal self, becoming the perfect you, the best version of yourself, you 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. You're constantly upgrading. And you get satisfied when you get closer to that goal. Whereas a negative perfectionist is always avoiding or trying to avoid that feared self. And they're usually dissatisfied with themselves. They're displeased with themselves. Now, I'm not talking about nafsi lawama. I'm not talking about these things. I'm not talking about the internal psychological or spiritual forces within us. I'm talking about the way we see ourselves, the way we think about ourselves. I'm focusing a lot on the mind in this presentation because it's so connected to uncertainty, which is linked to anxiety. So how you actually see yourself is important. Do you seek the ideal self or do you avoid the feared self? Now, like we said, there's positive and negative perfectionists. There's also active and passive perfectionists, different types of perfectionists. So an active perfectionist is where perfectionist striving actually motivates you. It moves you forward. It doesn't paralyze you. Whereas a passive perfectionist is the one that doesn't move forward, is paralyzed, and is always second guessing. Always, trying to find a better way to do it. And I'm not talking about problem solving. I'm saying that that there's 1,000 ways to do it and 100 ways will work, yet you still procrastinate. And so now you've become more of a passive perfectionist. Okay. So now here, again, you're not it's never all or nothing. You might have certain traits of active, certain traits of passive, certain traits of positive, certain traits of negative. The idea here is if we don't recognize the problem, how are we going to solve it? Well, one answer to that is actually, just focus on the solution. But if you find yourself chronically procrastinating, always procrastinating, then yes, you have an issue that you need to deal with. Otherwise, I believe everyone here in this session has attended a goal planning workshop, a motivation workshop, or you've learned something about most of this stuff, but yet you still procrastinate. You still have anxiety. You still have stress. So we need to kind of start to recognize, where is it all coming from, right? And here's just a kind of a quick summary of perfectionism and some academic issues. Aside from the procrastination that it leads to, it also leads to lack of motivation. When nothing is good enough, they did this study a long time ago. In Oklahoma, there was a tragic terrorist attack, the Oklahoma City bombings. And there were so many people who were in the rubble, underneath these buildings. And when they sent out the search dogs, the search dogs stopped working. And so what they actually did, believe it or not, they called the canine psychologist, basically the canine expert, the dog expert and he's an expert on dog motivation, which sounds awkward, but really it's basically behaviorism in action. But anyways, and so They called him and they said the dog stopped working. They don't want to work anymore. And the man, the specialist, gave them the best advice. He said, listen, remove the dogs from the scene. So they removed the dogs from the scene. They said, okay, so now what I want you to do is take your employees, take your workers, your search and rescue volunteers and everybody, and disperse them within the rubble, have them lay down, then send the dogs so the dogs can start finding these people. And so they did that. They did exactly that. The dogs then went back into the field. They started finding live bodies, and they were getting motivated. They were increasing. They were working even harder. So the conclusion was that these dogs were depressed. And they were depressed because they were not achieving their goal. They weren't even they weren't even achieving parts of their goal. They were failing, constantly failing. And so they started losing motivation to continuously work. Now, in the psychology literature, it's called extinction, right? It's a different story, but we're not going to talk about that in too much detail. But the idea is, if you keep working at something, keep working at it, and never achieve the goal, logically, you need to realize that you're going to stop being motivated. So you all need to have some small wins today. You have to accomplish at least something small to kind of reignite yourself. Now, writer's block, that's something that is a session in and of itself, because there's a lot of reasons for writer's block, but how that's related to perfectionism, well, ask yourself this question. Have you ever rewrote the same sentence 5 times over? Keep rewriting the same sentence over and over and over again. And if you're anything like me, you'll find that you'll have archives of writings and you wrote in almost the exact same way. So the 5 new additions, and you settled on the one you started off with first anyway. See, this is why we have editors in the world. This is why we have people who audit and read our work. Stop doing their job for them. Just write and submit and do the best that you can, or else what will start happening is you will get so anxious and so overwhelmed because of your perfectionism that you'll just stop writing and you'll start procrastinating. Give me a 1 if we're doing okay here. I always like checking in with people. I never, if I'm just talking to myself, yeah, I got them. Give me a 1 if we're doing okay for pace. Okay, so at least I'm talking to at least 2 people. Wonderful. Let's move on now. Now, you want to overcome negative perfectionism. How do you do that? Well, I've listed these for you to experiment with, but I'm going to assume most people are familiar with what a SMART goal is. A SMART goal is basically making sure that your goals are specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and timely. I use the word agreed upon because most of what we do involves somebody else. So if they agree on our goal, they're going to be a great source of helping us overcome our own negative perfectionism and our procrastination. A second strategy is monitoring your own self-talk. Stop for a second and think, what are you saying to yourself right now? That's your self-talk. So what are you constantly telling yourself when it comes to accomplishing these goals? A third strategy is take risks. And now again, I don't mean a risk is go sleep in a tomb for 3 hours just to see what it feels like. I'm saying a risk is do something that you have not been doing. The next strategy.
You don't see them, actually. You don't see the chatting.
Okay. Fair enough. So I'm not seeing all of your chatting, so just know that I'm not ignoring you. Thank you. This one is extremely important. Avoid avoidance. Avoid avoidance. You already know how to avoid it. So Now you have to start actually doing it. It's a double negative, which basically means avoid the avoidance strategies. Identify what strategies you use to avoid getting the task done and start avoiding them altogether. I don't mean manage it. I don't mean, watch only 1 hour of TV rather than 3. I'm saying avoid it altogether, the strategy that you get into. You're absolutely right, Mr. Rizal. Yes, negative self-talk. But the idea is monitoring all of your self-talk, because it's not just avoiding negative self-talk, it's also increasing positive self-talk. Prioritizing, again, if you've taken any time management workshop, you know that prioritizing your tasks and scheduling them is basically all of what time management is. Having a to-do list, having that to-do list prioritized on what you will do first and scheduled and when you will do it. That is the core. That is the basics of it. Now, this one, often people see as not that important, but in my line of work as a divisional psychologist, we have a lot of work on feelings. So you need to learn how to name your feeling. So if I was to ask you, what are you feeling right now? And if you want to have some fun with me here, type it in. Type it into the question and answer, or the all, or the question and answer if you're not comfortable with everybody seeing it. And let me know, what are you feeling right now?
Feeling bad.
Some people are giving us smiley faces, some are feeling bad. Many times prioritizing becomes complex and perfectionism, preparing the perfect to-do list kicks in.
Yeah. So,
Stress and overwhelm.
Very good, yeah. Just to be clear, I'm not asking you how you feel about this presentation. That's not important to me at this point. At the end, maybe. But what I'm asking is how you are feeling, because I want to know, are you able to identify and properly name your feelings? Now, okay. So again, learning how to name your feelings is important. And once again, if you're not willing to try something new, you expect things to change. When it comes to what you expected, for example, from this presentation, I know many of you probably expected me to tell you, do this, then this, then this, then this. But I'm telling you, that is what's probably causing your anxiety and frustration. It's because you need to be able to develop your own process of doing things. The next phase, sorry, I'm going to just move on because I'm seeing time is running out, is recognizing appropriate versus inappropriate, quote unquote, bad feelings. So sadness and despair are two totally different feelings. They're both similar, but one of them is you're upset at a situation. The other is you're losing hope. So recognizing which ones are appropriate and which ones are inappropriate is very important. And then there's more, right? And again, these are not just to overcome negative perfectionism. They can help you with a lot of other things as well. Rewarding yourself for small accomplishments, right, as we spoke about briefly. Acknowledging that you do have some choice in how you feel, think, and behave. And usually that choice starts with the way you think. Getting active and involved, and also embracing a new beginning. So if you're going through a transition in life, you can either get stuck in that transition, difficult, having it difficult to do new things, try new things, develop a new skill set, or you can embrace it as a new beginning, as something that, you're excited about starting. So you as a master's student or a PhD graduate, what you're doing is you're entering the profession of academia. You're becoming a professional academic. And just like any other professional, there's stages, there's a process, right? And that process starts off with gaining feedback from as many people as possible. Ask people to give you feedback. Whether you like it or not is up to you. But ask them to provide you with feedback so that you can kind of reflect on your own self. And, you know, when it comes to failing, this is a very important point. You have to recognize that failure is part of success. It's not the opposite of success. At this point, I want us to play this little game. It's called Famous Failures. But first, I just want to do a quick overview because we're coming close to the end of our presentation. And again, putting a real end to procrastination is what we're really aiming for because of how it links to anxiety and stress. And as you could see, it's an acronym, PREP. You have to be prepared. The question you have to ask yourself, and this kind of also goes back to, I believe it was Rida's question when he asked, well, how do I get started, baby steps when it comes to dealing with procrastination. And the first one is asking yourself, if not now, when? If you're not going to do it now, then when are you going to do it? Your procrastination, is it complicated or uncomplicated? So simply put, do you make the choices or do the choices make you? And that's a little confusing, but the idea is, are you in control or is something else in control? So that's where you need to regain control over your own mind and ask yourself, if not now, when? Or have a self-statement, a message that you tell yourself when you are losing focus. I'll leave these slides up for you, but the idea is if you really have a serious problem, you might need to seek professional help. You know, a mental health professional, a doctor. So I don't know if doctors can analyze your issue. They probably will jump straight to giving you medication. So, but do see a doctor anyway. But when it comes to dealing with the core of these issues, sometimes you have to understand that yes, it comes from parents, and you don't want to resent your parents later on in life. Rather, you want to have a very loving, caring, collaborative relationship with your parents. So you might need to acknowledge that this perfect child syndrome that we've developed may have came from our parents unintentionally. They didn't think that this would happen, but it did. And also to remind you as parents that you can have unintended consequences when you try to guide your children or your siblings towards perfection. Just a side note that I, wanted to say. So we'll just take a quick mental break and play famous failures because dealing with your failures is extremely important when it comes to managing future anxiety and stress. You need to recognize that failure is part of the success. Some of you may or may not know these characters. So as I read out the quote, or you read the quote, in the Q&A, quickly guess who you think it is. Oh, wait a minute.
There's no animation.
Oh, there's no animation. Okay. So forget the game. I'm just going to remind you that, it's not going to work. So Bill Gates actually failed many, many, many times before he was successful.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Mahdi. If you want to play an animation, you can upload share your PowerPoint screen. Yep. Or you can share your PowerPoint directly. In the quick start step in share file, you can share either your desktop or PowerPoint.
Okay, why don't I do that then? I'll share the desktop really quickly here. Now you guys know what video games I'll be playing. I'm just joking. Okay, so I'm going to share my desktop. Share my desktop. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you guys can see my desktop here?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. All right, you know what? You know what? It's okay. We're going to, all right. Sorry about that small interruption, guys, but basically, are we back? We're back, okay. So you have these famous failures. These people who have failed in the past but then became very successful. Like, for example, Walt Disney, when he first started writing, they said you don't have an imagination. They said you lack imagination. And now he's one of the most well-known writers and businessmen when it comes to imagination. Albert Einstein, I believe they said he was too dumb when he was a young kid, that he would not amount to anything. But his quote, this is one of my favorite quotes of Albert Einstein, which is, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. That's Thomas Edison. He invented the light bulb. Unless somebody believes somebody else invented it, maybe somebody from Egypt, Allahu Alam, but just in case, that's what we believe. And this image kind of represents it. You know, you're working so hard, but then you give up so close to the goal. Dr. Seuss, again, likewise, somebody who failed. He's a writer, a children's writer. Michael Jordan, I believe everybody knows Michael Jordan. He played, I believe, for the Egyptian soccer team.
No.
Just joking. So again, Michael Jordan, if you think about it, there's some movies where a person has that final shot in a game, or there's 3 seconds left and they score and they become a hero. But if they miss, their life is shattered. But the idea here is even Michael Jordan missed over 26 times. Last final shot and missed it. But again, failure is part of that success. Oprah Winfrey, I don't know if you all know who Oprah Winfrey is, but they said to her, "You're not fit for TV." And now she's the richest woman in the world. Finally, Abraham Lincoln, the idea here is, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe, getting prepared. That's what it's all about. It's about prep, putting a real end to procrastination. Abraham Lincoln was demoted to the lowest level of the army when he first joined. All right. But here's the thing. If we're going to deal with some of these issues, we also have to understand whether or not we are organized, right? And I want to just, again, a little light break here. You tell me, in the box below, 1 is yes, or put yes, and no means no. Tell me if the image is organized or organized in your view. All right? Organized or disorganized? This not, yep. Organized or disorganized? Very good. Organized or disorganized? So all of the engineers in the room think this is organized. Everybody else thinks no. Just joking. Organized or disorganized? Organized or disorganized? This is where you start to see the differences in the world. So as long as everybody's going the same way, it's organized. Whereas this is somebody, and it's not me, I promise you. I did not say this, but somebody said this is the annual convention of Egyptian drivers. It wasn't me. I do not agree with it. I think that's terrible to say that, but that's what some people said. Organized or disorganized? Now, those of you that have been there know that there are certain spaces that are extremely disorganized, yet people are willing to go through it. Organized or disorganized? Organized or disorganized? Organized or disorganized? Thank you, everybody, for your honesty in that. The first step to getting organized, again, the SMART goals that we mentioned. Time management basics. I'm leaving this up for you just in case. You have never attended a time management workshop. I'm leaving up these basics for you. But the message here is that uncertainty leads to anxiety. So you need to be certain. You need to identify all of the steps involved in your path to your success, to achieving that goal. I'm not going to do this exercise. I usually do it in my workshops, but the idea is I walk people through a series of statements, and it actually invokes stress. It makes them extremely stressed out. And then we go through stress management techniques, all right? So I would recommend that you spend some time with somebody and try to deal with your own level of stress and learn how to manage that stress. If you're able to see, some universities have free services when it comes to counselors and mental health professionals, some don't, depends on where you are, but try at least to see somebody once, even if just once, to deal with issues of stress and stress management. Anxiety is a little different because it deals with the way you think, and it takes much longer to deal with anxiety than it does with stress, right? But relaxation, whatever way you relax, try to use that as much as possible. Again, the golden rule here is if it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, stop doing it. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. Don't deal with issues that are not issues. And the things that have worked for you in the past, do more of it. And those that have not worked, well, stop doing it. That's the logical way of looking at life. These 5 techniques, again, deep breathing, so the breathing needs to be, in through the nose, try to, suck in as much air and then release slowly. Progressive muscle relaxation is basically, it's like if you were to make a fist, if you're still paying attention, make a strong fist, that's stress, and then release it, right? Tense up all the muscles in your body and then release. That's what progressive muscle relaxation is. But you can Google any of these terms and you can find a whole wealth of knowledge on them. Meditation and spirituality. So for some people, meditation is relaxing in a room for a couple hours. Now, here's the thing. This session is, again, it's not about spirituality and religion, but for those of you that do connect very well, even if you're not fully concentrating and relaxing, the idea is that routine alone can help diffuse some stress. But that's maybe for another day, another time, another venue. Again, visualization is very important. There's a saying in the sports world, fake it till you make it, right? Actually visualizing what's going to happen, how you're going to approach this issue or this person or this task. And what I like to remind people is, well, we're from water, right? Our essence. So be like water. Water, before anxiety, before something big happens, before a rock comes into it, doesn't flip out. It ripples, but then it comes back to its natural state, right? It's not, freaked out every time something is going to come their way, its way, or whether it's an assignment or a task or a person, they flip out. What they do, basically, the baseline is relaxed. If you can get your baseline, if you can have more relaxed days than stress days, then that's the goal that you probably want to work towards, right? Finally, just kind of wrapping up here, having optimism, knowing that it will get better. Things will improve. If you stick to the plan, whatever plan you have for yourself, things will improve, right? Now, because we're coming closer to the end, I'm skipping through quite a bit of things. I'd like to just kind of ask you very briefly, without talking about it in detail, about your own self-confidence. And sometimes this is what we feel like. Somebody just points at us and we flip out and we freak out and we get terrified. At other times, we are naturally afraid of those big bad dogs in our lives, right? And I don't mean dog in a negative sense here. I mean dog in a scary sense. We're afraid of those scary challenges, of taking new risks, and that's very normal. But this is what we have to become. And I don't mean we have to become obedient dogs. No, I mean we have to become very brave and courageous when it comes to challenging our fears. So, in conclusion, procrastination kills progress. It also leads to increased stress, increased anxiety. If you're able to eliminate procrastination, or at least reduce it, then you're able to manage your stress and anxiety much better. But it's not the only thing causing anxiety and stress. As we mentioned, there could be a lot of things causing anxiety and stress. If you thought that in 2 hours you were going to learn everything there is to know about anxiety and stress, that is your first mistake. Is that your expectations are not rational. This is an issue that you and I and everybody has been dealing with for years. If you think that you're going to overcome it in 1 day or in 1 hour, again, that's an irrational thought. It takes time. And what I'm going to ask you guys all to do is whatever it is you need to do it 5 minutes at a time. If you have an assignment due, just get started. Just for 5 minutes. If you've never once asked yourself about your own type of perfectionism, I'm going to ask you to sit for 5 minutes and reflect on it. If you've never once thought about your stress and the sources of it, or your procrastination and why you do it, take 5 minutes just to do that. When it comes to the way you see yourself, again, you need to recognize that the way you see yourself is not the way everybody else sees you. If you think that you're weak, most people around you don't. If you think that you can't do it, most people around you do. So you want to surround yourself with people that are able to promote that positive image of yourself, not people that are going to bring it down. One thing that I advise a lot of people to do is you need to start getting those people in your life that take all of your energy, take all of your effort, and there's very little impact on their lives. So these are drainers. These are people who continuously drain your motivation. You need to surround yourself with people who will continuously fill you up with motivation. So again, some people will say, well, how can I do that? Oh, the person needs my help. That's a totally different presentation. But the idea is just start recognizing the people in your lives that are taking away your energy and whether or not they deserve it. Because I'm sure there's other people that deserve your time and effort much more. Finally, when it comes to organization, again, we briefly just touched on it because I think it's important that everybody knows that if you're still lost after this, maybe the issue is not stress and anxiety, maybe it's goal planning, maybe it's task management, time management, and so I've left that with you. And again, when it comes to concentrating and the positive and negative self-talk, That's something I'd also like you to start monitoring. And finally, becoming like water. Water's baseline is relaxed. If you can become overall more relaxed, then I believe you'll have a much happier life. You'll be more productive. You'll get through this graduate studies much better than most of your colleagues who are struggling every day with it. So thank you very much. Again, if there's any other final questions, please put them up here. We'll do our best to answer them in the 11 minutes that we have left. And I've left you some references. My colleague here, Dina Saeed, has translated these into Arabic for you, and they're very good strategies. Read them, and I'd love to hear your feedback and what more we can do. All right. So any last questions? We have 11 minutes to go. And thank you all. Sorry, I'd like to also again thank the administrators here, and thank you, the participants. It's not easy to take 2 hours out of your time to attend this presentation. So I'm very, very grateful. Just kind of going through all the chats. And thank you all also for being so engaged in this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahdi, for your time and this very interesting and interactive presentation. And it was really our pleasure to host this webinar today. And I really thank the participants for their paying attention and being interactive throughout the whole webinar. So please, if you have more questions, please post it to Dr. Mahdi before we conclude.
So there's a question here, how can I find my self-motivation?
No, I'm just joking. Okay, I'm just going to look at all these. Yes, Egypt scholars, thank you. So 2 questions that came up throughout, and I think they're the most fundamental questions that we need to have answered. One of them was, how do I, step by step, overcome my procrastination? How do I break that down into chunks? The quick answer is 5 minutes at a time. There's a saying, when people are asked, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is, well, 1 bite at a time, right? I don't know if you guys eat elephants. We don't in Canada, I assure you. But the idea is any goal can be broken down into manageable parts. The other question was self-motivation. How do I find self-motivation? That is actually what my PhD topic is about. So if you give me a year or so, I'll have a better answer. But for now, you want to look at 3 main things. Internal motivation, and that's how I'm defining your term self-motivation. So that motivation that comes from within me and not from others and outside of me. You need to feel connected, competent, and have choice. So it needs to be your choice. You need to feel connected to the thing or the people around you or whatever task you're doing. So in this case, your graduate studies, you have to have that connection with your supervisor. And the final thing is competence. You need to feel that you're actually accomplishing something. So if there's a relationship issue with your supervisor, that would be one thing to start off with, even if it's just an honest conversation about the relationship. Otherwise, that can affect your internal motivation. If it's not your choice, if you were forced into this, then you really need to focus on the external motivation and get it done. Otherwise, that loss of choice really affects internal motivation. And finally, competence. If you're able to accomplish smaller tasks, then inshallah, the idea is you'll start to improve your own internal motivation. So if you're interested in more readings, look into the literature on internal motivation or intrinsic motivation.
There was also a question up there, I remember it was about what if I am, my motivation is the fear of failure, not the being like bitter.
Yeah. Actually, I want to answer this question. I'm spending a lot of time reading and attending workshops about stress, and am I wasting my time with that? And you need to answer that question for yourself. Are you wasting your time with it? I mean, if you don't take away some practical tips from all of them, then maybe you are wasting your time. Maybe you already have what it takes, and it's not more knowledge that you need, it's more motivation and practice. So again, a lot of the stuff, it's very hard to come up with extremely creative answers and new knowledge when it comes to stress management. There's 1,000,001 websites that deal with it. The idea is motivation, on the other hand, is different. Your motivation changes every single moment, perhaps. What you need to do is really focus on your motivation to complete a task rather than learning so much about the problem. You probably need to start focusing on the solution more. I hope that answers your question. It's a tough question, though. How to deal with seeking perfection and looking for 100% accuracy all the time? Well, even the greatest scientific studies are found at a 99% confidence interval, right? So the idea here is you should probably always seek 100%. Don't seek a 90%. The idea is when you don't achieve the 100%, go back to the slides on negative and positive perfectionism. So the goal should always be 100%. The goal should be perfection. But what does that do to you? That's when perfectionism it becomes a problem or not. In the field of psychology, there's a lot of stresses and anxiety are not problems unless they interfere with your daily life. So if you're stressed, that's okay. Sometimes stress is good. Makes you focus, right? And it does a lot to the brain when it comes to focus. Anxiety also, it might get you to be more creative. But the idea is if it starts to interfere with your daily life and it starts leading you down a path of procrastination, then that's when it becomes a serious problem. 5 students refuse to do, yeah?
This is the
Thank you. Thank you for your links. Oh, you sent that?
this is the Egyptian.
Oh, yeah, appreciated. So
Someone is asking, are you Egyptian?
we're all Egyptian. What was the last? Any final questions? My friends on this panel, any final questions? Any questions from the administrators as well?
I think we have no more questions, so we can conclude.
What was that question you said? Sorry, one last one, yeah?
What if you are driven by the fear of failure? Like about the fear or seeking improvement.
Right.
So what if you are the failure rather than improve? What
Okay.
can you do about it?
So, I just saw a few other questions too. I'm going to try to include that into my final answer. How do I stop thinking about work when I'm at home? That's a tough one, right? Whenever you say, how do I stop thinking about something, that involves a very serious process. Because, and I don't mean a bad process, I mean serious as in it takes some time. Because, I mean, think about it. If I was to tell you, stop thinking about a white elephant, it's very tough. So you need to sometimes distract yourself with other things. Other times you need to challenge the thought. If the thought is irrational, you have to ask yourself, is it a rational thought? Is it necessary? And is it constructive? Again, a very quick answer to a very complex question. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, and we have another session, I have no problem talking about positive thinking and dealing with some of that kind of stuff. But for now, look into the literature on cognitive behavioral therapy, and you'll find a lot of really cool stuff on thinking. Now, when it comes to, what was the question?
Driven by fear.
Right. If you're driven by fear of failure and it's working for you, then all the power to you. It's only when it becomes a problem and it's not leading you to your goal that you should worry about it. Otherwise, my final comment here is if it's not interfering with your daily life, if it's not increasing your misery, then it's not so much a problem. However, are there better strategies to do it? Absolutely. When it comes to motivation to keep moving forward, there's internal motivation, and then there's external motivation. Some of us are motivated by the goal of having the letters behind our name and the money that comes with it and the status and the prestige. Others are satisfied and content knowing that they're becoming a professional academic and that they're contributing knowledge that benefits for the world. And some have both. And some have both every single day. And some, and so the idea here is if stress and anxiety interferes with your daily life, then it's a problem. Then take all those strategies and deal with them. If not, then I know for a fact most of you, if not all of you, have more important things to worry about. So at this point, thank you so much for all of your attention and for all of your comments and your involvement. Again, 2 hours of your time is very valuable. This workshop that I do, sometimes I do counseling with people for 6 months before they see any change or progress. And this workshop is usually a full day. I'm glad we were able to do it in 2 hours. Again, I'd like to thank Dina Saeed for all her hard work on the slides and keeping this presentation going, as well as the administrators of Egyptian Scholars. Really appreciate your hard work. You're really doing a great service to this world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kafif, for this presentation. And I would like to thank all participants for paying attention throughout the whole presentation. And inshallah, the slides and recording of the webinar will be up within this week on our website, Egypt Scholars website, egyptscholars.org, and I posted it in the chat box. And for the references, I've posted them temporarily in the chat box if you really want to read through them. Yeah, and that's it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you guys very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. شكرا جزيلا.